So, what are some legal hurdles families face when trying to access a deceased loved one's digital assets without a will?
I think we can frame that firstly by talking about the hurdles of accessing any asset without a will. So we deal with that first. So what happens if somebody dies without a will? And a will does two key things. Firstly, it puts somebody in charge of everything. That's your executor. That person has the responsibility to gather the assets, secure the assets, and make sure they're taken care of, and then distributed according to your instructions. And that's the second part of the will. It's describing who is going to be receiving what. So the main legal hurdles are firstly, there's nobody in charge. Nobody has responsibility. You haven't named somebody to take responsibility for securing all of your assets. And the reason why that's important is because if we look at digital assets, and we can get into what a digital asset is, but supposing you had a balance running on a PayPal account, and then somebody contacted PayPal and said, I want to get this balance because I want to, this person's died. Here's their death certificate. I can prove this person's died. Now I want to get the balance out of their PayPal account. PayPal aren't going to do that because they don't know that the next day somebody else isn't going to call them and ask for that same balance. They have no way of knowing whether you are authorized to do that collection of the assets, and they're not going to risk handing it out. There is a process involved, and the process required to give somebody the authority to gather assets is called probate. And so if you don't have a will, probate is more difficult. If you do have a will, it's straightforward. That person's given the authority to gather up your assets. And what most online service providers will ask for is what's called a grant of probate to make sure that you have the authority to gather up the assets.
So, I guess we should immediately touch on what precisely is a digital asset because right now people will immediately think of like cryptocurrency, for example, or, numbers in their bank account as digital assets or like their wealth symbol or something. But in our previous discussion, it's a lot more than that. It's a much broader range of things. So, how exactly should we define a digital asset? And why has it become so essential in today's digital age?
So there are various categories of digital assets. There are some digital assets that on their own have real, genuine financial value. So that could be uh, a domain name, for example, right? You could have a domain name that's actually worth a lot of money. We are often at Legal Wills, there's somebody who owns wills.com and they want to sell us wills.com. They think that's worth a lot of money. In fact, it is worth a lot of money. X.com, if you had that, you would have made an absolute killing. So there are some, and domain names is just one example, but it could be a revenue stream from your YouTube channel or your revenue stream from your podcast, right? There are things, what we consider to be digital, but they have real financial value. NFTs, crypto, all of those things. But there's also sentimental assets as well that you might want to give to a beneficiary. So that could be a photo directory, like your Google Photos, iCloud account, Flickr, if it's people still using Flickr, but there's sentimental. It could be your audio recordings or voice recordings, something like that. Then the other digital assets are those access to something that has underlying value. So that would be your logins to your bank accounts. So the bank account really isn't a digital asset, but your access to that bank account is requires digital access. But it has underlying value with or without the digital portal. And then there's other things that may have social value, like all of your instruction that you provide people on Reddit or any forum or something like that. There's a body of work that you may have put online that has social value. And what's going to happen to that? Who's going to take that down if it's going to come down? Uh, do you want all of that information still out there? So even your Twitter, your tweets, your lifetime value of social commentary. What's going to happen to that? Should that be around, or do you want that to be around, or do you want it scrubbed? And then there's other things that are just fun. There's the stuff that you put online that people find entertaining, and it's just it sums up the characteristics of you. So when your grandchildren look you up, they're going to see your contribution to the world's body of knowledge. And what do you want to happen to that?
Right, right. I don't know how my grandchildren will feel when they look at my when they look at the fun section of my digital will. So then we've understood what digital assets are. Is a digital will just a simple wrapper for all of these things, or is it more nuanced? How should we start thinking about digital wills?
So a digital will, I think, is more nuanced because I think it separates two things. One, the handling of accounts. So your handling of your bank accounts is quite straightforward. Like your handling of your bank accounts, I want you to collect it and give it to this beneficiary. Straightforward. But what do you want to happen to these things like your social commentary, your LinkedIn account, your Facebook account, any of the social media accounts in particular? As of the last 2 or 3 years, all of these accounts have created what we call a legacy contact. So you can put somebody in charge of your footprint on that particular platform and decide and tell your legacy contact what you want to happen to that. So it's giving instruction for each of these platforms what exactly you want to happen. And there's nothing worse than getting a reminder from LinkedIn to wish somebody a happy anniversary for their job when they died 5 years ago. And I have at least 3 people in my LinkedIn contacts who I knew personally who have died, and somebody really needs to close these accounts down. It's distasteful. But I think something else that's nuanced is getting the right person involved. And the person who you may have assigned to be your executor, your full real executor, may not be the best equipped person to deal with your digital assets, including, for example, virtual real estate in a virtual world. Your parents may not be the best people to navigate the cashing out of your virtual assets, turning them into real live money, and then transferring them to a beneficiary. So, you may want to appoint somebody with more specific knowledge and skills for dealing with those particular assets.
Sure. Yeah, I'm waiting to have the talk with my mom about how to operate the metaverse and how to sell all my real estate, my VR real estate. You know,
You know what? And to be fair, I mean, I'm clearly a different age, different generation. I actually looked up some of this before I got on this call in terms of Linden dollars and cashing out for Linden dollars and what the current exchange rate is for a US dollar and things like that. You can absolutely legit do it, but I consider myself, I work in tech. I consider myself to be fairly tech savvy. Not everybody is going to have the skills between filing your final tax returns with the Internal Revenue Service or CRA in Canada, um, and also cashing out your Linden dollars. They might not be the same person.
it's good that you brought up that point. You are of a different generation. You are of one of the worldly generations, and your goal is to kind of get not particularly, but get especially Gen Z and Gen Alpha on this kind of on-ramp to understanding that digital assets have value and digital wills are not this kind of morbid topic, but they are a necessity. It's like, death, taxes, and digital wills, essentially. So why is it, I guess taking a step back, why is it crucial for particularly Gen Z, the so-called digital natives, to understand the reason, necessity of a digital will moving forward for themselves and also for their parents. And if you could give us some examples of, because we talked about some examples before of precisely why, like all the hurdles people have to go through.
Yeah, so I think um, there's a digital footprint that you leave, and I think that you of your generation would have a better sense of what has value and what doesn't have value in that digital footprint. And you can curate it a little bit in terms of deciding, and documenting how each of these assets is going to be handled. And the it's kind of funny, like the examples that come up are when parents they want to get access to their child. If something happens to their child, they want to get access to that child, understanding either what happened or what they have, or understanding a little bit more about them, um, and what led to an accident or something like that. Something happened, and we need to understand a bit more about their assets and the last 6 months of their lives, we didn't really have good contact with them. We don't really know what's going on. So what invariably happens is that parent contacts an internet service provider and says, I need access to their inbox. I need access to their phone. You might not want that, right? You might not want your parents getting unfettered access to your inbox. There's a way that you can make your assets available. There's a way that you can make your digital executor or your parents have access to the things that they need without just giving them your inbox. And I certainly like, I'm not sure I want anybody to just read through my inbox. There's stuff in there that's personal to me. And so I think it's more the sense of having control. And incidentally, no internet service provider has ever done that. They've never said, oh, yeah, here you go. Here's the password. You can go through the inbox, go crazy. They won't do that. They won't do that. So it's a matter of deciding what information that you want to leave your loved ones without them having to fight through the courts. And that may not just be your inbox. It could be access to your phone. It could be access to your iPad, your iCloud account. It could be whatever it is that the parents or your friends are trying to get access to. And you can decide ahead of time what you think is appropriate for somebody to have access to. And I'm a parent. I know, for example, that my daughter has an Instagram account that her parents have access to, and we're friends with her, but she has the other Instagram account that we're not supposed to know about, right? So, there are things, there are things that you do to have your own private digital footprint that you may not want your parents accessing.
Yeah, it's you just freaked me out with she doesn't know that you guys know, but you guys already know. Parents always know. Yeah, my parents have called my bluff on certain things a bunch of times. So I'm waiting for that Sajic intuition. So what are some of the common misconceptions people have about digital wills? I guess it's a two-parter, a misconception in terms of like a reluctance because there's like this denial of death, not to bring up Ernest Becker, but they just don't even want to think about it. It's like I'm 20. I don't want to, like I'm just barely beginning my life. I'm just about to graduate university or college or whatever. You're telling me to like wrap everything up, just in case I die. But there's also this reluctance in terms of why digital? Like why does that matter? These are useless things. It's trivial. So if we can just, you choose which one you want to go with. There's like this
Okay.
reluctance of death and reluctance of the digital.
Okay. So let's deal with the first one first. So you're not writing your will because you think you're going to die today. That's the fundamental point here. I have my will in place. I think I have another good 40 years, but I have my will in place. Probably the chances of me dying, it gets greater the older you are, no question. but your will isn't written once in your lifetime. You
Hmm.
write it when you become an adult, and you update it over time as your circumstances change. And one of the key misconceptions is that, I can write my will once I get married, or once I have a child, once I buy a house, once I accumulate some assets, and then I'm going to do it. You shouldn't take that approach, because your life will never reach stasis where it doesn't change. There's always going to be something on the horizon that's going to change your family status, or your assets. Like, your assets are going to change throughout your life. So you don't have to wait until that perfect time. It's a document, especially if you use an online service like ours. You just log into your account, you update the will, and then sign the new document. It takes 5 minutes. So you write your will when you're young, and you update it throughout your life when your circumstances change. So it's not done in contemplation of death. And this idea that somebody's laying on their deathbed and they're going to scratch their last wishes as they're laying on their deathbed, that most of us won't have that opportunity. When the bus hits us, we didn't have the opportunity to quickly jot down our wishes.
Right.
So write the will, put it in a safe place, and update it throughout your life as your circumstances change.
So that's the reluctance of death. What about reluctance of the digital, which is kind of just like digital assets don't really matter. You talked about some stories of parents trying to get access to certain types of things, or children
Yeah.
trying to get access to some of the parents' things.
Yeah. So I think that there are those financial assets that, and I think a lot of people may think, well, I don't own a house. I have an old car, it doesn't really matter. But there is also your online world, your digital footprint, what you've left. And whether I think young people have probably more. They have more to say online, whether it's, YouTube videos, or a contribution to any social media platform. Is, what do you want to happen to all of that? And sometimes it can be a huge body of work, if you like. You've put in effort to create, and I don't think you can really dismiss the. And some people might say, you know what, everything I've ever put online's been dross. But I'd like to think that some people feel that they've made a contribution. And there's information or creativity or something online that may or may not have any financial value, but it may have sentimental value, and it certainly is your legacy. And that legacy needs to be preserved. And even if you're 18, 19 years old, you still have a legacy, and you have something that your parents and your loved ones and your cousins will want to remember you by, and your friends.
Before we get to the next batch of questions, how did you find yourself in this position? How did you start this company? Like, what is your background? How did you gain the experience to even start having these ideas? And then why did you start the company that you're at right now?
So it came about from the traditional sense of writing a will. And what happened was, I worked for a high tech company, and we used to go out for drinks every Friday after work. And we went out one Friday, and there was about 14, 15 of us around the table. And one person, and back then, we were all in our 30s, and somebody said that they needed to write a will. And everybody went round the table and acknowledged, yeah, that's really important. We really need to have a will. And not one single person around the table had written their will. And these are people with families, houses, good jobs, assets. Everyone knew it was important, and nobody had done it. So immediately, I was there with a very good friend of mine who ended up being the co-founder, and we're still in business together now. We looked at each other and said, that is a problem. That's a problem. And it's not about we can't afford it, but it's just not convenient to make an appointment. There must be an easier way. So we actually set about researching it and working with lawyers and figuring out if there's a way of putting this online, so you just go online. And this actually predated even tax software to file your taxes, which has now become the de facto way of filing your taxes. You answer a series of questions, click submit. And we thought, well, we've got to be able to do that same thing for writing a will, because it's such an important document. And, dying without a will just leaves a complete mess for your loved ones. The one thing, so yeah, I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, I'd like you to talk about the one thing, but I also want to also touch on, I kind of want to be, I want to explore how the traditional way of building your will and writing your will is done, because it's a kind of crass thing to say, but it's kind of funny how backwards we are in certain things sometimes, and how we can just come in and like immediately change something, like from taxis to Uber. It's like, of course, let's just do it like this. And the world really hasn't gone back. And so for, as you were saying, tax software, the world really hasn't gone back. I think for wills, once people see how easy it is, it's kind of like you don't have to think about it. You can just do it. So please say your one more thing if you still remember it, and then tell us about like what is the process of creating that will? Like how
Yeah,
frictiony is it?
yeah. So actually, the one thing I was going to say was like the difference between dying with a will and without a will. And I was going to say why it's a problem. And oftentimes, if you are married with children, ultimately it ends up going the same place as you would if you had a will, kind of. But if you don't have family, if you're a single person, then it's often not obvious who's going to receive everything. And some people say, oh, I don't have family, it doesn't matter. And in fact, that's actually the cases where it matters most, because there's no clear direction as to what's going to happen to all of your things. So I was just going to mention that not having a family is certainly no reason to not have a will. But in terms of the other comment you made, yes, this is a critical thing about will writing. The law for writing wills was written in the 1850s and fundamentally did not change for like 170 years. That law says that your will has to be written on a piece of paper and signed in the presence of two witnesses in ink. And it didn't matter that, 170 years ago, there weren't many other options, right? That was it. You're going to write it on a piece of paper and sign it in ink. But then you think of all the things that have happened in the last 20, 30 years in terms of digital signatures, cloud storage, encryption, and none of that got adopted by the will writing industry or the legal profession, if you like. And it's interesting because when we do talk about digital assets, like the legal profession is notoriously um, arcane. It doesn't adopt new technology very quickly. And you think of this image of like, astute lawyers sitting with their wigs on trying to pass new laws. And it's like, you're not going to be able to pass a law about virtual worlds and Second Life and pass it. It's just not going to happen. There's no intersect there between the lawmakers and the world of digital assets. So what happened is that for 170 years, it never changed, but COVID did move the needle slightly as to how you could sign a will. And for the first time ever during COVID, they passed emergency laws to allow people to sign it remotely on a Zoom call. I could sign my will and you could be my witness on this Zoom call. And then I would have to stick it in the mail and mail it to you. And then you sign it and mail it back to me. So COVID allowed people to do that. So from 1850 to 2021, nothing changed. And then that changed. And then what we saw after that was digital signatures, because ultimately, the idea that I can prove my identity by scratching my signature, is that the best way for me to prove that I was actually the person who authorized this document? And to still use an ink signature as the ID biometric is insane in 2024. So they did pass a law in a couple of jurisdictions, like 2 or 3 states in the US, 1 province in Canada, where you could actually use a digital signature to electronically sign and then electronically store your document. But it just makes me, there were so many concerns about fraudulently e-signing documents, and I'm like you've never heard of a fraudulent ink signature? It's the easiest thing in the world to forge. But that's for 170 years what we were using to identify people.
Are there any current or new technologies that are exciting and can also help with these digital wills? Everybody's speaking about artificial intelligence, but could Web3, for example, help? Like, will Web3 make or break digital wills? If you have no thoughts on this, we can move on from the question. But new technologies, especially the ones that are right about to hit an inflection point or have already hit an inflection point, are kind of disrupting in small and large ways a lot of things. And
Yeah.
so yeah, what thoughts do you have on these?
So I think the key difference is like traditionally to write a will, uh, people would book an appointment with a lawyer, go to the lawyer's office, oftentimes fill out a form in reception to say, what do you want to do in your will? And then submit that to the clerk in the law office, and they would go behind the doors and prepare your will and come back out with it. Um, that's clearly that's going to change, right? There's nothing special about no, there is no reason to restrict that to the legal profession. And oftentimes people will go to a lawyer to get their will written, and the lawyer would write it and say, you know what, I really do just do real estate most of the time. I don't really do wills, but I think I've got this software that can do it, so I'll be good. Right. So it's even finding, you're paying a premium to have a lawyer write your will, whether or not they have the skills to actually prepare a will or the experience to do that. But I think that it shouldn't be that difficult to write your will. We shouldn't rely on old, you know, the language of Geoffrey Chaucer to write a will. It's like I bequeath thy herein thou'st hereunder bequest to. It doesn't. You don't have to do that.
Right.
You can just write your wishes clearly and express those wishes clearly for your executor. One thing that has changed in recent times is a lot of jurisdictions are moving in the direction of really trying to understand what the person meant and not trip you up on some legal, oh, he was missing a comma, therefore let's throw the document out. That doesn't happen anymore, right? So I think it's going to become more of a commodity. Certainly AI, you're right. AI right now is saying, I can't really give legal advice, but if I could, this is what I'd give you. So it's kind of on that like gray area where it can probably do it, but it's overly cautious. But it's only a matter of time before we'll be able to have the tools to easily do. And in fact, oftentimes certainly in terms of digital assets, AI will give you a better answer than 99.9% of lawyers. If you ask them,
Really?
what can I, oh, no question. If you went and said, oh, what can I do with my Bitcoin? Can I put that in my will? And a lot of lawyers would say, I'm not too familiar with NFTs. I don't know what an NFT is. So I don't know what you can do with that. Is that worth something? You go, AI already can give you a better answer than nearly every lawyer.
Okay, this is a great moment to say this is not legal advice and this is also not financial advice. You guys do what you
Thank
want to
you.
do. But
Yes.
no, that's shocking and striking that AI would give a better answer than 99% of lawyers. Lawyers will also probably say that's not true, but then also not know what NFTs and Bitcoin are because they're a very egoic bunch.
Yeah. Okay. I said 99%. That was an anecdotal number. I don't know. Let's just call it a high number. A
High
high
number.
number of lawyers will not be able to answer that question.
Sure. Sure. That is, I mean, it's still striking. Um, one of the things is we were talking about technology, technologies like AI and cryptocurrency, a lot is changing, but a lot changes, in regular Web 2 anyway. And one of the things is that we see terms and conditions update all the time and, whatever rights and freedoms being infringed upon, all of that, privacy is being invaded. But how should or how would digital wills also update? Like when Facebook updates or when X updates or TikTok or this or that, like how would digital wills kind of metamorphose over time?
Um, so I'm going to take your. I don't think I'm going to answer your question, but I'm going to take your question as a talking point because what happens is there's a misconception that you're going to put your login credentials in your will, for example, right? Or you've got to put in your login credentials somewhere. You've got to document somewhere to your digital executor. I have this account, party poker, or I have an online gambling account that I use all the time, and I have a balance in there. Here's my user ID and password, and there's a few issues with that. Firstly, the current terms and conditions will invariably say you cannot share your login credentials with anybody. And that is a violation of the terms and conditions. And if you share your login credentials with anybody, your account will be suspended and forfeited. Right. So right now, the common approach or the general recommendation is to keep your login credentials kept in a spreadsheet somewhere where that will allow your digital executor to access. But technically, according to terms and conditions, that's not allowed. Furthermore, I think one of the great big evolutions in the last year or two is the proliferation of two-factor or multi-factor authentication. So even if you have that user ID and password, it's not going to help you because it's then going to send a text to the phone to with the code to get into your account, or we use OneAuth or some authorization service to protect the account. Particularly if it's a financial account, there's invariably there's going to be protections there. Um, and beyond that, there's also an issue with a lot of these service providers. The jurisdiction that they're operating in can be anywhere. Most of them are headquartered in Gibraltar, the Isle of Man, the Cayman Islands. So what is your legal access to that account? Like, even if you were appointed as the digital executor and you say, I don't want to get to violate the terms and conditions here, but I want to get access, and they say, we don't recognize a US grant of probate. We're operating in Cayman Islands, right? So there are still a number of things that need to be um, figured out. There are some things that don't have good answers currently, and because a new service can pop up that we never heard of 2 years ago, and then all of a sudden it becomes a big deal, or conversely, things just disappeared. So all of the people who spent, $250,000 on an NFT of a tweet, and suddenly that NFT is not worth anything. So it's so dynamic that we don't have necessarily all of the answers to all of these things.
Sure, sure. Just two more questions, but the second last question is split in two. I want you to kind of talk to two people and explain the necessity of a digital will, two very different people. Number one is you're talking to a parent and explaining why they need to create a digital will for their children who are Gen Z and Gen Alpha. And then the other side is basically the flip side is talking to a Gen Z and explaining why they need to create a digital will for their parents. Because we've talked about it from a high level, but one thing that I've also found is that humans work and understand far better through just simple storytelling and through simple conversation, which is one of the reasons why podcasting has taken off so much and why everybody enjoys listening to podcasts. So can we start with you explaining to a parent, precisely why they need to create a digital will for their Gen Z and Gen Alpha children?
So I wouldn't necessarily like, so I think the parents need a digital will, or they need to provide clear instruction for what happens to their digital um, infrastructure, if you like. And the reason I say that is because invariably, if most of us think of our parents, we think of one of those parents as usually taking the lead on setting up the digitization of the home, if you like. And the other parent, and I'm not going to say the mom or the dad, because very oftentimes it's the mom who's got, um, you know, the smart light switches and the ring doorbell and all of those things are so. But usually one parent has got it all going on, and the other parent lives in the house. And this is another form of those digital assets when all of a sudden one of those parents dies or becomes incapacitated, and the other parent says, I don't know how to unlock the front door, right? Because apparently it needs a software update. And it used to work with my Android, but now I've got an iPhone, and all of a sudden, one of them is completely out of their depth with, the light switches in the home, the blinds that come on at sunrise and sunset, but suddenly don't. Um, so I think that it's important, and these aren't really digital assets, but it's giving an instruction for all of the things that surviving parent is going to have to deal with. And for my parents, it was always my mom never knew the PIN for the ATM. My dad always got the money out of the ATM. But for my generation, for my kids, it's more like I've got the house working, and if something happened to me, there's a lot of things that my spouse may or may not know how to operate. And that could come down, just getting into devices, getting the house automation working, and things like that. So I would say that, a digital will, yeah, but more an instruction book for, do you know the Wi-Fi password? Or is it just automatically entered every time you open the device? Because if something happens, you're going to need to know what that is. So it's things like that, and I think it becomes complicated.
So this is for, or that explanation was for people who are not necessarily tech savvy, but what about the people who are tech savvy? What about the Gen Z and Gen Alpha who have grown up with technology but don't necessarily see a reason to have this digital will for whatever reason, whether it's they don't think they're going to die very soon or at all. I know that hubris has extended to all generations, but it does seem, with Brian Johnson or whatever, it seems like we'll be living far longer, which again, I guess is more of a reason to get the digital will. But again, I digress. Why should Gen Z or Gen Alpha make the digital will for their parents, or get their parents to create the digital will? Like, how should we even start that conversation? It's like, hey, mom and dad, you're gonna die soon, so put all of your stuff on a sheet of paper.
Yeah, I don't think it's necessary. I wouldn't necessarily say you're going to die soon, but what happens if something were to happen to you? What happens if you're hospitalized?
Mhm.
Do I know all of these subscriptions that you're signed up for? And one of the exercises that we talk about is writing down all the things that you have to take care of. Um, and you think, what a laborious task that is. Well, imagine if it's not your list and it's your parents' list, or your parents writing the list for you. It's a long list of, what there was some I wish I knew the stat. I just read it yesterday. Like our average monthly subscriptions for online services, it was crazy. It was like, $400-500 a month in online subscriptions, whether it's, and half the stuff you're not even using. It's just recurring, right? Like you've lost track. You've lost track of those subscriptions. But somebody, if something were to happen to you, needs to take control of all of those things. And yeah, it's important to have them documented. So, and I think for a young person, why they would need it for their parents, I think it goes back to our idea of, what is going to be your memorialization and what would you want to be your legacy to the world. And even if, yeah, you're not, we don't think you're going to die yet, but let's think of it as a work in progress for building that handling of your legacy. And it may be that you're not too super proud of your contribution to the TikTok platform, but maybe your Medium articles are something that you're proud of, and you want something to those to be memorialized in some way or immortalized in some way.
As a final question, this doesn't have to necessarily go on or around legal wills, but what advice do you have for Gen Z? You're a father, you're also interacting with a lot of Gen Z on a daily basis. You see a lot of the problems with Gen Z um, that they either choose to talk about or not talk about, whatever. But what advice do you have for the generation moving forward? Because you have a lot of knowledge, you have a lot of experience, you're in a very untapped industry, like the legal will industry or digital wills industry. So, how should we reorient them to a better direction towards a better future?
So if this is just general advice, I would say like look at things that you think are could be done better and find a solution for doing things better. And that's ultimately what we did at Legal Wills. And it's become very lucrative for us as a solution, but not only lucrative for us, but I think it's made a huge difference to people who have now been able to write a will who couldn't previously write a will. I would also say that one thing that we do within our service is we include charitable bequests as a prompt when people step through and they say, okay, what do you want to happen to your estate? And the first question we ask is, do you want to leave anything to charity? And people can say, yes, I do. I just want to leave, $500 to this, or, they can leave an amount of money or percentage of their estate to charity. And since we've done that, we've generated over $500 million in charitable bequests. And this all came from us sitting in a pub thinking there's got to be a better way. And then realizing that it probably was and coming up with a solution for that. And as a consequence, driven $500 million in planned giving or charitable legacies through our platform. So we could have easily just had another drink and let it slide. Right? We could have easily just said, wow, that's a problem. But we decided, no, let's really look into this. And I think that is the message for Gen Z, because you're going to see millions of problems. And a lot of times our generation either accept what is a inefficient way of doing something. It's just, I can't believe we still do this. And then Gen Z can look at it and say, no, let's do it this way instead. And that applies to law, real estate, and all of those examples, the whole gig economy, everything. And I think that the world has never been a better place for seizing opportunities like that to fix problems.
Tim, this has been a great conversation. Where can we find you online?
Um, Legal Wills is the handles for the company. So Instagram, Legal Wills, Tim Hewson, TimHewson. I'm on most of the platforms. So yeah, look up Legal Wills. We're in the US, we're in Canada, UK, and South Africa as a platform now. And yeah, you can by all means reach out to me directly. My contact information is on the website, and be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much.